So now we have all this in place, we can go ahead and jump over to the device styles.css, and we can begin to write our responsive layout code. So the first device that we'd like to consider here is the tablet when it's in landscape. So for example, the Apple iPad when it's flipped landscape has 1024 pixel width. So we can jump over to our browser and we can use ScreenFly to make sure that this will look correct on that device. Right now we're seeing our website on the 15-inch notebook size screen, and we can jump down here to tablet and we can select Apple iPad 1 and 2, which has the 1024 width screen size. Okay. Now when we change it to the iPad, you can see that most of our site looks okay still. The navigation text looks pretty good. Logo's looking pretty good. And everything else is okay. I think the wrapper here might be a little close to the edge, but I can correct that. And then also you notice here, one thing that might be problematic is that the social media icons here are starting to overlap now into the content. So I need to figure out what I'd like to do with those. So I have a couple different options here. I can hide the social media bar, or I can opt to move it to a different section. So for example, I think what I'll do here is I'll use this empty space here and just position them on top of the logo panel in this corner. So let's go ahead and go back to the code, and we will write out our first media query to accomplish that. So first we'll say @media, which will check the device and grab some information, and we can write a statement here that's going to evaluate to true or false. If this media query statement evaluates to true, it will use the code that's captured inside of the media query, and if it evaluates to false, it's just going to skip this or ignore the code inside the media query. Okay, so these statements can be quite complicated or quite simple, and it's up to you how sophisticated you make them. The first thing we want to do is we want to say only screen, and this will only evaluate to true if it is a screen device. Some other things you can say here is you can say @media all, which would encompass all devices. You can also say printer or for projection as well. And in this case, we're concerned about a tablet, which is a screen device. So here we'll say only screen, and then we'll use the keyword and so that we can continue on the statement. So you can use the word and as many times as you like, and that will make sure that this evaluates to true, and whatever is on the other side of the word will evaluate to true as well. And in our case, we want to also make sure that the maximum width in this case matches 1024 pixels or less. And then we'll put a set of curly braces, and I'll hit return a couple times there. Okay, so you can say min-width, max-width, and you can really put in any sort of pixel amount you like. In this case, we want to make sure that it is a landscape tablet of 1024 pixels or less. Okay, so we've said @media only screen devices, and also where that screen device has no more than a width of 1024 pixels. Now if this is true and that's true, it's actually going to run the code here that we write here. So we can just start writing normal CSS code here in between this opening and closing curly brace for this media query, and that code will run when this statement, the full statement here, is true. Now if either side of this is false, if this is false, it's not a screen device, or if it is a screen device and this is false, it's actually larger than 1024 pixels, it will not run the code here. And one of the nice things about media queries is that I don't have to write all the CSS code over again, because it's still just going to inherit the styles that I've previously written. So for example, in the style.css page, we have the body background image here is the handmade paper texture. And if I don't want to change that in the media query, then I can simply just leave it out. I don't have to rewrite all of this code again, which is wonderful. We don't have to spend time wasting copying and pasting a bunch of code. We really only need to write the code for what we'd like to change when this condition is true. Okay, so in our case, we felt like the wrapper was a little too wide. What I'm going to do is a common technique, which is to change the fixed width wrapper, which is 960 pixels currently, to change to a fluid width so that it will only be a percentage of the width of the device. So here I'm going to set the wrapper now to 90%. Okay. And a few other things we wanted to change is I want to target the social media bar, and I want to change its positioning, which before was set to position fixed, and I want to set it now to position absolute instead. And that way it won't stay fixed in place when the browser scrolls. But we can still use absolute positioning to position it in relationship to the browser window. And we're going to go ahead and say top 100 pixels. And I actually had to play around with this a bit to get it to appear in the right place. And 100 pixels just about centers it. And then we'll go ahead and say we want to move it about 5% over from the edge of the screen. The way I calculated this was we set the wrapper to 90. So out of that 100% width of available area in the device, we're setting the wrapper to squeeze down to 90, which leaves an available 10%, which would be 5% on the right and 5% on the left. So we'll just set it to 5%, and this should allow the social icon bar to line up right with the edge of the wrapper on the right hand side. And we're actually going to change the width of this thing. So before, the width was set to 40 pixels when the icons are stacked vertically, but we're actually going to change all of those links to display horizontally now. So in order to do that, we need to in order for them to fit, in other words, we need to change the width. And if I set the width to auto, it will just be as wide as it needs to be there to fit all of those elements. The next thing we want to do is we want to target those links inside of that social bar. We can use the descendant selector to do so. And we want to set them, instead of display block, we want to set them to display inline block so that they'll display side by side like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and then we can come back to ScreenFly, and instead of refreshing the page here, what we want to do is, if you go to the edge of the frame window here and you right click, I'm using a mouse to right click. If you are on Windows, you should just be able to right click. If you're on Mac and you do not have a 2-button mouse, you can control click to get that to work, or 2-finger click to bring this menu up. And inside the menu there should be something that says reload frame, and if you click that, it should reload the site page there. Okay, so some things are working. There's another thing over here broken, which we'll address in a moment, but you can see that the icons, social media icons here, they moved from the side. And in order to preview that, to make sure it's working correctly, if you want, you can switch back and forth. So here's the 15-inch screen. So now the social icons are on the side here. And the wrapper is 960 pixels, and it will stay at 960 pixels even if it gets wider. So even if we go up to like 19 inches or 20 inches, the size of the wrapper stays maintained at 960 pixels, which is dictated by the style.css style sheet. But then when we come down to a smaller size, for example, we go to the tablet, iPad, now the wrapper is set to 90% of the screen, and these social icons here change to inline blocks, so they're now displaying horizontally instead of vertically, and they're also inside of this logo bar here. They're positioned on top of the logo panel. Okay, so one thing that you'll notice is when you scale down to smaller sizes here, that the images are not scaling. So certain things this is problematic for. For example, this image, and will also be problematic here for the video when it gets down smaller and smaller. And also things like the tables and forms. So what we can do is, a common technique is that you'll want to set all of your images and videos and audio tags, all of your forms and tables, anything that's normally stretching across the whole section or whole frame of the page, you're going to want to set those to a width of 100% so they have a fluid width, and they'll scale down on different size devices. For example, if I go down to a really small size here, among other issues, you can see this image is off the screen right now. So a really easy way to fix that is to go into your main style sheet, which is the style.css style sheet here. And under fixes here, we'll come down and we're gonna see, we'll come down to line 32 here, and we're gonna set images, video, and if we had any audio in our site, we could set audio, and any iframes and any like forms and tables to all be 100% wide. Okay. I already actually set this individually for the table, I believe here, yes. And I actually already set this for the form. So normally I write all of these out. I've already written these in the code elsewhere. Also for the iframe, I believe. So really the only thing that's left here is the images and videos, and I'm not using an audio tag in this one, so I can even remove that one as well. But normally you have all of these written like this. All of the things that are stretching in your site across the screen to the edge of the wrapper, you can set them to width 100% like that. So if I save this and then we come back and refresh here, let's try this again. So I will go to right click, reload frame. Okay, and then if we come down again to tablet, now you can see that the image is only 100% within that wrapper. So it's going to scale down for each size. So now even when I go down to like the iPhone size, the image just gets really small like that. But it's not jumping outside the frame. Okay. So we've gone ahead and tackled the style for the iPad when it is landscape, and if we rotate the display, we can check out what it looks like here when it goes down to portrait. Okay, I'm going to jump back into my style sheet here and go back to device styles.css, and here we'll go ahead and change a few things under the portrait view for tablet. So really the only thing I want to change here is I want to make the navigation links a little smaller. So we'll go ahead and say at media only screen and parentheses max dash width, and we'll say 768 pixels. And we'll use our curly braces and open this up like that. We can indent inside of here and just nest some styles in here. And we'll go ahead and say navbar space nav space A, targeting all the links inside of navbar. And we'll change their font size to be a little smaller because it's kind of crowding and getting a little close to the edge there. So we'll say 0.8 em. So ems are fluid, they're in relationship to the previous font size. So 1 em is equal to the current font size, and 0.8 will be slightly smaller, 0.2 smaller. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that and come back. And we will reload the page here, reload frame. Okay, so you can see those guys got smaller there. And now there's a little more space. Okay, so if I switch now, if I rotate the display, Here you can see the size of the text in the link here on horizontal, so for landscape, and then if we rotate the display here for portrait, you can see those link text gets a little bit smaller there, and we have a more comfortable amount of space around the link text on the buttons. Okay, awesome. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set this guy up for smartphone. Okay, so I want to go to smartphone landscape, which would be, if I rotate this here, this is 480 pixels wide like this. Okay, this is kind of okay except for the fact that I want to be able to see more of the content here. It's all well and good to be able to see this navigation here and this logo, but it would be nice if I could see a little bit more of this image, the intro image, and maybe even some of the text if possible. So in order to get this up the screen higher like that, I think what I'm going to do is kind of shrink this a bit. Maybe this is a bit too tall here. Also, we should be able to take these guys out to make space. And I think we'll move the logo about as well. So I'll try a few different things here. If we scroll down here, this is also a little too narrow. So if you look at this column structure here, right here where it says company news, this would be really kind of annoying to read, because imagine you're only able to read like 2 words and then you have to jump down to the next line. So what I'm thinking here is we need to abandon our multiple column structure. I suspect this is even worse on the catalog page, which has 3 columns here. So this is just way too narrow of a line. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to merge this guy to 1 column structure here and set the columns to 100% wide within that wrapper. Okay, so we'll go ahead and come down here and we will say at media only screen and parentheses max dash width colon 480 pixels, which is the width of the iPhone when it is in landscape. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove the social bar here. We need to make room, so we'll say pound social. And anytime we want to hide something, I can simply just set to display none. Like that, we'll hide it and move it out of the layout. So it doesn't really destroy the content, it just makes it so it's not visible any longer. And we can always make it visible again later at any time we want. And we'll set the nav bar here to position static. Okay, so I'm removing the fixed, the positioning of fixed off the nav bar, because on a larger screen it's nice to have the nav bar follow, but it's a big thick bar and it's taking up too much space on a smaller screen. So on a smaller screen, when people scroll down further, I want them to be able to use the full width of their device's screen to see the content and not have the navigation bar taking up so much space. When we move this back to static, instead of being above, it's actually going to be underneath the logo area. So I think I'm going to change the border to be on top of it. We'll go ahead and set this guy to be border dash top to make a visual line in between the logo panel and the nav bar here. So we'll set this to 1 pixel solid CCC. And then for all those links inside there, we'll add some padding above and below. We'll make it a little bit less. So I think this had a padding of like 22 pixels or something like that before. And I'll set the padding above these links now to be only 10 pixels. So that will make this narrower here. We'll go ahead and say padding 10 pixels, top and bottom 0 on left and right. Okay. And then the logo here, that's the next one, is the logo panel, which you'll remember before, the logo panel is a little bit too tall here, and this had like 80 pixels of padding so that it would appear below the fixed nav bar. We're going to remove a lot of that space there. So we'll go ahead and say logo, padding, and we'll say 0 on the top now for logo, and 0 on the left and right, and 10 pixels just on the bottom. All right. And we'll come down here to the H1 and H2 for the logo. We'll go ahead and say pound logo space H1, comma, pound logo space H2. Remember, that's where it says ZHW shoes in the logo there. And we're going to change the margin on the top here to be smaller. We'll say, we'll actually use margin dash top, and we'll change this to 10 pixels like that. Okay. And let's see here, for the H1 itself, we'll adjust some padding on that guy as well. We'll say padding 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, and 30 pixels of padding on the left side to push it in a little bit. And for the image, the little crown image, we're going to change that to be off to the side by saying background dash position 0 horizontally and -5 pixels vertically. So what we're doing here is we're taking the little crown that was above the ZHW shoes, part of the logo, that was the embossed little gray crown, and we're moving it from the top over to the side. So I added additional padding on the side, 30 pixels width for that crown, and I've shifted it, the background positioning, to be 0 horizontally, which is on the far left hand side, and -5 pixels, moving it up a tiny bit vertically to align with the lettering. And that should look pretty good. So that should take care of the logo. The other thing we want to do is we want to set the columns. So I have all of these column styles, like column 1 left, comma, column 1 mid, column 1 right, and column 2 left, and column 2 right. These are all the ones that were floating previously, and we can select all of those classes, and we can use a comma to just group all of them together, and we can tell all of them to be set to float none. So instead of floating left or floating right, however they were floating before to create that side-by-side column structure, we're going to change it to float none. And we also want them to take up the full width of the wrapper now, so we'll change them to have a width of 100%, like that. And we want to remove the margin off all the sides except for the bottom, like this. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that. Okay, and then down at the very bottom of the details page, down at the very bottom of the details section down here, you can see that these guys are no longer fitting side by side. These are now going to be one on top of the other, but we're not going to have a need for the little line here, which was called border right. We added a class called border right in the previous exercise to make this little dashed line here. So I want to actually remove that. So we're going to come back into the code, and we'll select that style, which is called border_right is the name of that class. And we will set border dash right to now be set to 0 to turn it off. Okay, that should be all the stuff we need to do. There was actually quite a lot. Changing from the desktop to the tablet, there wasn't very many changes. But when we changed down to the 480 pixels, we actually lost a lot of space, so I had to change a lot of different things here, as you can see. So let's come back in and we'll try this again. We'll go to reload frame. Cool, so now we only have one column. So now like brands and shoe archive, and these are the different sections of the catalog, men's, women's, etc. These guys are all now one column. I moved the navigation down below, and notice that the navigation is no longer fixed. So when we scroll off the screen, we don't have to worry about the navigation being on top of stuff and taking up space. It's more area now to see pictures and read the text. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And you can see we move the logo then onto the side here. And what we'll also do is we're going to change the size of the logo text. Let me go ahead and come back here, and now that I look at this, I think it might look good if we set this guy to 1M. Like that, and save, and there we go. So I set this guy smaller. That looks a little better there. All right, so now we have a tinier logo, a narrower logo panel because the text is smaller. We moved the little crown off to the side. We made the text inside the link smaller, and kind of made this whole area skinnier. So as soon as you see the site, you can already start seeing some of the pictures and things here, and can begin to scroll down and check out the content. Okay, cool. And now the company news is stretching the full width because all my columns are not floating anymore. They're each 100% width and creating a single column structure like that. And same with the 3 panels at the bottom. Now these are all vertically instead of horizontally. Okay, that's cool. All right, last thing to do is check out the portrait view. So we'll go to rotate display, and you can see here that the only thing that's really, this is kind of it's okay still. The text is still readable here as a single column. The only thing that's really maybe problematic here is this text here inside of this navigation bar. I could make the text smaller, but then at arm's length, when you're holding this thing at arm's length, the text would be kind of too small. And also when these boxes become that small, if you have a big stubby finger like me, it's a little bit hard to click those links when they become this tiny and close together. So let's focus mainly on this nav here for the portrait size. So we'll come back into the code here, and we're going to scroll down to smartphone portraits, and we will say at media only screen, and where the max width is 320 pixels, like that. And then if we come in here, I'm going to make the wrapper a little bit narrower now. It was 90%, and I want a little bit of space if I need to have scroll bars or something like that. So we're going to change this guy down to a width of 80% instead of 90%. We'll shave off some space there. And we'll go ahead and say nav bar. Okay. And for the nav bar here, we'll go ahead and change the width of this guy to be 100% of the screen there. We'll set the border on the top to 0 to remove it. And we'll set the border on the bottom to be 1 pixel solid CCC like that. And then we'll set this to text align center, so it will center the nav element inside of it. And we'll also change the background of this guy. We're going to just set this guy to background white, like that. All right, and then the nav bar itself has a wrapper inside of it, and I want to make sure that that actually expands 100%. So I can change this by saying navbar.wrapper. I'm going to set this guy to have a width of 100%, like that. And we can style the nav inside of it by saying navbar space nav. And we will set this guy to, normally had a border left on it, and we want to set that to 0. We no longer want a border on the left-hand side of nav. And then we can focus on the links inside of there. And these guys were displaying inline blocks, so they were side by side. I want these to be vertical now, so I'm going to set them to display block. Okay. And we'll also set these guys to have a width of 100% to override their previous width. And we will change the font size here to be a little bit larger, because when you're holding this at arm's length, the text might be a little hard to read. And navigation text should definitely be large enough to read. You need to know where you're going in the site. So we'll set this guy to, we'll do border dash right. And we'll set that to 0. We want to remove the border off the right hand side. And we'll change it instead to be border dash top. So each link will have a border above it. And we'll set that to 1 pixel solid pound CCC, like that. All right, let's save that, and we'll see how that looks, and then we'll decide if there's anything else we want to change. So I'll come back in here, I'll right click on the edge of the frame and click reload frame. Cool. Okay, the logo's not aligned though, so we have to go back in and fix that. Let's come back here, and we're going to go ahead and select the logo here like this, and I'm going to say text dash align center to get that logo to center, just like all of the navigation links. Cool, we'll save that, and we will reload the frame here. Reload frame. Cool, so now my logo is centered, my navigation is centered. When I scroll down, they disappear, and I can see all of that. Okay, that's pretty cool. And let's go to the sale page. Make sure these guys look okay. It's always good to test all your different pages, make sure your content's displaying correctly. All right. Okay. Here is the Google map, and here is our form. All right, and that's all looking pretty good. Okay, so if I go down here to the pricing table, this is looking like it's problematic here. Not all of this will fit. So if I rotate to the display, it's kind of okay here when it's, it looks like it's just enough room here when it's in landscape view, 480 pixels wide, but when we get down to the iPhone horizontally, it looks like there's not enough room. So I would either have to make the text smaller inside this table or hide some of the columns. I think if I make the text any smaller here, it's not going to be very visible from a distance. All right, so let's say hypothetically that the only thing we were really concerned about is like the brand name and the pricing, And on a mobile device, some of this information we can let it go. So what I'll do is I'll actually create a class specifically for this. I'm going to come in here and let's create a class called hider, like that. And let's go ahead and add this guy to say display : none. So anything we apply a class of hider to is going to be set to display none whenever it's below this specific size. All right. And we also want to select those table headings and table divisions, all those little cells in the table, and we want to give them less padding. I think they had 10 pixels of padding before. We're going to make them a little bit closer together. And let's also make the font size slightly smaller. We'll go font size 0.9em, like that. So we'll go ahead and save. And we want to have to go, and then we're going to have to go into the pricing.html page and add a class onto each of those guys. So I've already gone ahead and done this for you, but you can see that I decided I wanted brand and pricing to appear, but then when we get down to tax, I added a class of hider on tax. And here we have in stock, I added class of hider to hide it. And under order ID, I added a class of hider. So when this page loads on a larger screen, larger than 320 pixels wide, like any other sort of tablet or desktop, or even an iPhone when it's horizontal, there's no specification for the class of hider, so it's not going to do anything. However, based on this media query, when it is under a width of 320 pixels, then all of a sudden the class of hider has some style specified to it. So it's going to set to display none and hide those guys. Let's give this a test and see how that works. So we'll go ahead and save this here. And I'm going to go ahead and come back into the browser and we'll do a refresh here. Let's say reload frame. Cool. So now this table has just the brand and the pricing which fits, and we made the text a little bit smaller but not too much smaller, so that's still readable there. Okay, that's about it. To do one last test, I always go through each of the different devices. So you can come down and you can say, oh, this is what my website looks like on this size screen, and this is what it looks like on this size screen, and this is what it looks like on this size screen. So here you have the horizontal, the vertical, and it's a good idea to test this out on all the different pages. You want to check out your maps and your forms and make sure that all of these things are displaying correctly on all the different size devices. So this is actually pretty time consuming. You'll go back and forth and you'll tweak little changes in your media queries. One last thing we're going to do is we're going to set one up for @mediaprint. So if you say file print screen in your browser, we can go ahead and say star to select everything, and we can set the color of everything to black. Now to override, star is actually a pretty weak selector. It's easy to have more authority than star and to override it. So what you can do to be on the safe side is you can use a compound selector. You can put commas and we can specify, well, I mean also H1s, H2s, H3s, H4s, H5, H6, all of my text elements essentially, all paragraphs, all links, all the other text that's inside of sections, floating loosely in divs or inside of tables will all have the color black. So this will save your printer's ink. Okay, so we can save, and if we come back in here to Chrome, for example, let's say this is the site I want to print here. So you'll notice that this view larger map link here is blue underneath my Google map. Now if I go to File, Print, when the preview comes up here, you'll notice that it's changed that to black text. So this guy's all black and white now. Excellent. Okay, so that's it for creating responsive layouts. So next you're going to want to move on to the code challenge, and you're going to create your own device styles.css, and you can create your own media queries to change certain aspects of your site based on the size of the device.